house no one escapes from. I never believed the stories about the old house on Grayson Street. People called it the house no one escapes from. But to me, it was just a creepy, abandoned building that stood in the shadow of modern city life. Curiosity got the better of me one evening, and I convinced myself that a quick look inside wouldn't hurt. I arrived just before dusk, the cold autumn wind biting at my skin. The house loomed large and dark, its windows like empty eyes watching me approach. The front door creaked open with a push, revealing a foyer thick with dust and silence. Every step I took on the wooden floor echoed through the stillness, almost as if the house was waking up, aware of my presence. I should have left the moment I stepped inside. The walls seemed to close in on me as I walked deeper into the house. There was no furniture, no signs of life, just empty rooms, peeling wallpaper, and that suffocating silence. But something felt off, like I wasn't alone. I could hear faint whispers, too low to make out. At first, I brushed it off as the wind, but the deeper I ventured, the louder they became. I entered a narrow hallway lined with doors. One by one, I tried the handles, all locked, until the last one. It opened with a slow creak, revealing a room that felt strangely preserved. A single chair sat in the middle of the room, facing a large mirror. My reflection stared back at me, but something was wrong. The figure in the mirror, it didn't follow my movements. Panic surged through me. I turned to leave, but the door had slammed shut behind me. I ran to it, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, clearer now, calling my name. My heart raced as I scanned the room, looking for another way out, but there was none. Suddenly, the figure in the mirror moved, without me. It stood up from the chair, its eyes locked onto mine, a twisted smile spreading across its face. My blood turned cold as it reached toward the glass, and then the mirror started to ripple. I backed away, heart pounding in my chest, as the figure stepped out from the mirror, solid and real. It moved closer, still smiling. I felt frozen, my legs refusing to move. The last thing I heard before everything went black was a whisper in my ear. "You belong here now." The next thing I remember was waking up on the floor outside the house. The door was shut, and the whispers were gone. I scrambled to my feet and ran as fast as I could. But even now, I feel like I never really left, because something has been following me ever since. I thought I had escaped that night, thought I was safe, but the nightmare followed me. It started small, like shadows in the corners of my vision that weren't there when I turned. My reflection seemed to move just a second too late. At first, I convinced myself it was all in my head. I was just paranoid. But then, things escalated. A few days after leaving the house, I woke up in the middle of the night to a faint scratching noise. It was subtle, like nails dragging across wood, but it came from inside my room. My heart pounded as I turned on the light, scanning every corner, but there was nothing. Just an empty room, my clothes scattered on the chair, the window closed. But then I saw it, faint, almost invisible, but undeniable. Handprints on the inside of the window, as if someone had been pressing against the glass, watching me while I slept. My skin prickled with cold sweat. I wiped the window clean, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light. But every night after that, the handprints returned. I kept telling myself it was impossible, that I was imagining it. But deep down, I knew it was real. Something had followed me from that house, and it wasn't going to let me go. One night, the whispers returned, louder, clearer. They were no longer just in the back of my mind. They filled the room. It was as if they were inside the walls, calling my name again and again. I sat frozen in bed, too terrified to move. My phone was on the nightstand, but I didn't dare reach for it. The air felt thick, suffocating, like the house was closing in around me once more. Suddenly, my closet door creaked open, slowly, just a few inches. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. The whispers grew louder, now echoing from within. And then I saw it, the figure from the mirror. It stood just inside the closet, grinning that same twisted smile, its eyes gleaming with malicious intent. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. My limbs felt heavy, like I was sinking into the bed. The figure stepped out of the closet, gliding silently across the room. The air grew colder as it came closer, that horrible smile never fading. I could feel its presence, like icy fingers crawling up my spine. Just as it reached my bed, it whispered in a voice that seemed to come from all directions at once. "You thought you left, but no one escapes." I bolted upright, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. The room was still, the figure gone. But I knew this wasn't over. I knew it was only the beginning, and I could feel it, waiting, watching, ready to return when I least expected it. After that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it, hovering just beyond the dark. The days blurred together. I started hearing whispers even in broad daylight, faint but unmistakable, like breath on the back of my neck. I wasn't imagining it. Something was here. One evening, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know if I was losing my mind or if this thing had really followed me. I bought a cheap security camera and set it up in my bedroom, pointing directly at my bed. I needed proof, anything that would confirm I wasn't alone in this nightmare. That night I lay still, too terrified to sleep, but too exhausted to fight it. Hours passed in silence, but then, around 3 a.m., the cold returned. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, feeling the familiar weight of dread. The camera's little red light blinked in the corner. I forced myself to stay awake, eyes locked on the door, waiting for it to creak open like before. But tonight, it was different. This time, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy, coming from just outside my door. They stopped, and the knob turned with a soft click. My stomach knotted as the door swung open, revealing nothing but the dark hallway. Yet I knew something was there. The air felt charged, alive with some invisible force. I barely breathed as the footsteps resumed, now crossing into my room. But there was no one there, just the sound, moving closer, until it was right next to my bed. Suddenly, the blanket was yanked off me with a violent pull. I shot up, heart pounding, and grabbed my phone, opening the camera app with shaking hands. The screen was a blur as I scanned the room, trying to catch whatever had done it. Nothing. Just empty air. I forced myself to look at the security camera feed. The screen showed me lying in bed, still and tense, and then I saw it, movement. A faint, shadowy figure creeping from the hallway, standing over me, its form barely visible. It was the same figure from the mirror, but this time it didn't just watch. It reached out, its hand hovering over my face. My heart raced as I watched, frozen in disbelief. The figure slowly turned, its head locking onto the camera. Its eyes, hollow, dark, and endless, stared directly into the lens. Then, without warning, the feed cut to static. I dropped the phone, panic clawing at my chest. The room was suddenly silent, too silent. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it, standing right behind me. I dared not turn around. My body trembled uncontrollably, every nerve screaming at me to run. But my legs wouldn't move. The air grew colder, and I could feel its breath on the back of my neck. A soft whisper, one I'd never forget, breathed into my ear. "You can't escape." I bolted out of bed, crashing into the hallway, running for the front door. But the walls seemed to stretch, the hallway growing longer and longer, trapping me. The whispers were everywhere now, surrounding me, closing in. My vision blurred, and just as I reached the door, it slammed shut in my face, locking me inside. And then I heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping. I turned slowly, heart pounding in my ears. At the far end of the hall, the figure stood, that same twisted smile stretched across its face. It started walking toward me, slow and deliberate, each step sending shivers down my spine. I backed away, hitting the door with a loud thud. My hands fumbled with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. The figure was getting closer, and this time I knew. There was no running from it. The last thing I saw before the lights went out was its hand, reaching for my throat. Then everything went black. And when I woke up, I was back inside the house. When I opened my eyes, the air felt wrong, stale, damp, and suffocating. The dim light flickered weakly above me, casting long shadows on cracked walls. I sat up, my body aching as if I'd been dropped from a great height. Panic hit me like a wave when I realized where I was. I was back in the house, the same rotting wood beneath my feet, the same suffocating silence. But something had changed. The walls seemed closer, almost pressing in. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. I staggered to my feet, heart racing, every muscle tense. The front door was just a few feet away, but I didn't dare move toward it. I knew this place wasn't going to let me leave so easily. I heard the sound again, the faint footsteps. This time they came from beneath the floorboards, slow and deliberate. My skin prickled and my breath caught in my throat. The sound wasn't distant anymore. It was directly beneath me, creeping closer, as if someone was crawling beneath the wood. Suddenly the floor began to creak, bending slightly under invisible weight. My stomach twisted as the floorboards started to split. Long, thin fingers emerging from the gaps. They scratched at the wood, pulling at the cracks, making a sickening, scraping noise. My legs trembled, frozen in place. I backed away slowly, every inch of my body screaming to run. But something told me it was pointless. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it was toying with me. Every corner I turned seemed to stretch into darkness, trapping me deeper within its walls. The whispers returned, louder this time, and more voices joined them. Echoing from every direction, I stumbled into the next room, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one cracked, reflecting a distorted version of myself. But something wasn't right. In each mirror there was a shadow standing behind me, a tall, twisted figure watching, waiting. I spun around, but the room was empty. The mirrors lied, or worse, they showed me what was coming. I didn't have time to think. The lights began to flicker wildly, plunging the room into intermittent darkness. The whispers became screams, screams of others, people who had come before me. I could hear them calling for help, begging for escape, but I knew none of them had made it out. Then the figure appeared. Not in the mirrors this time, but in the doorway. Its form was clearer now, tall and lanky, with eyes like hollow pits of endless darkness. It didn't walk, it glided toward me, its twisted grin growing wider with each passing second. I scrambled back, bumping into one of the mirrors. The glass cracked further, splintering under my touch. The figure was nearly upon me, and I knew there was no outrunning it this time. My legs felt like lead, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Just as it reached out, I did the only thing I could think of. I smashed the mirror behind me. Glass shattered everywhere, and for a split second, the figure hesitated, its grin faltering. I seized the moment and bolted for the door, flinging it open and rushing down the hall. But the walls closed in, twisting, the hallway growing darker and darker. I ran, but no matter how fast I moved, the door at the end seemed farther away. And then the footsteps returned, louder now, closer, echoing in my ears. The house was alive with sound, with laughter, with screams. It was playing with me, pushing me deeper into its endless maze. Finally, I reached a staircase that spiraled downward into complete darkness. I had no choice. I took the first step and then another. But with each one, the whispers grew louder, the air thicker until I could hardly breathe. Halfway down, I froze. From below, something began crawling up the stairs, fast. A grotesque shadow, moving on all fours, its bones cracking and twisting with every movement. It was coming for me. I turned ready to run back up, but the staircase behind me had vanished. There was no way out. The last thing I heard was the sound of my own breath, shallow and trembling, as the shadow closed in. And then the lights went out, but I was still alive. For now. The darkness was absolute. I stood paralyzed on the staircase, gripping the cold, rough banister, my chest heaving in the silence. I could hear it again, the slow, deliberate scraping of something climbing toward me from below. My pulse thudded so hard I thought my heart might give out. I strained to see anything in the blackness, but my eyes saw nothing, only sound, wet, uneven breaths coming closer, the sharp crack of bones shifting unnaturally as it moved. I stumbled backward, pressing myself against the wall, my body trembling uncontrollably. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The walls of the staircase were narrowing, suffocating. I tried to steady my breath, tried to tell myself that this wasn't real, that I was imagining it all. But the sound, that sound, was unmistakable. The creature was getting closer, dragging itself up from the abyss, relentless, unstoppable. Suddenly, a low voice broke through the dark, raspy and guttural, as if scraping against gravel. It whispered my name, each syllable drawn out, savoring every part of it. "You're still here." My legs buckled as I heard it. I pushed myself up, fighting against the panic. The walls were closing in, the space around me shrinking. The creature's heavy breathing was now just a few feet away. My pulse hammered in my ears and the cold air stung my skin like needles. Without thinking, I ran down the remaining steps, plunging myself into the dark abyss. I could barely see, my feet stumbling, the air growing thicker with each step. The whispers chased me, calling me back, teasing, like it knew I had no way out. My lungs burned and the narrow staircase twisted endlessly downward, trapping me in its spiral. Then out of nowhere, the ground vanished beneath me. I tumbled into open air, falling, limbs flailing in the suffocating black. My body slammed into the floor below, and I felt a sharp pain shoot up my leg. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself to sit up, gasping in the silence. I wasn't alone. From the shadows, I heard faint voices, soft, broken whispers. My eyes adjusted slowly, and I saw them. People, or at least what was left of them. Their faces were pale, gaunt, their bodies twisted and contorted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. They were scattered around the room, pressed against the walls, motionless but very much alive. Their hollow eyes stared at me wide with terror, as if silently begging for something. Release, maybe? Freedom? But I knew they'd never leave. They were the ones who had come before me, the ones who never escaped. And then I felt it, that creeping cold behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know what was there. The air grew icy, thick with the presence that had been chasing me since I first stepped into the house. I could hear its breath again, deep, slow, deliberate, like it was waiting for me to make a move. I tried to stand, but pain shot through my leg. The figures in the room started to move now, their heads turning in unison, eyes locked on me. They weren't whispering anymore. They were screaming, their voices overlapping, chaotic, echoing off the walls. I crawled toward the far wall, desperate, trying to find an exit. But every corner I reached was solid. No doors, no windows. Just endless stone trapping me inside. The walls seemed to throb, like the house itself was alive, feeding off my fear. Behind me, I could feel the figure looming closer, the air around me growing colder, suffocating. I could almost hear the faint rustling of its clothes, feel the shadow of its twisted grin hovering just inches from the back of my neck. Then something cold touched my shoulder, a hand. My body froze, every muscle locking up in pure terror. Its grip tightened, cold and bone-chilling, as the creature whispered in that same broken voice, "No one leaves." The walls began to shift, closing in, the stone groaning under the weight of something ancient, something inescapable. My vision blurred, the screams in the room deafening, and I could feel the darkness pulling me under, dragging me back into the heart of the house. And then everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I opened my eyes again, I was still there, still trapped in the house. And I knew deep in my bones that there would be no way out this time, because the house wasn't just holding me, it was becoming part of me, and I, part of it. The screams echoed in the distance, but they weren't calling for me anymore. They were mine. I was part of the house now, bound by its walls, consumed by its darkness. The whispers had grown quiet, the air still and cold. I realized I wasn't the first and I wouldn't be the last. If you've made it this far, you're already too close. The house knows you now and it doesn't forget. You can try to leave, but it always finds you. And if you don't subscribe, like, and share this video, well, let's just say I'll be paying you a visit soon. You can't run forever. Thank you for watching, and remember, you've been warned. Good night, if you can sleep.